Brave New Films and 3 women who've accused President Trump of sexual misconduct called on Congress to investigate allegations. During a news conference, they called for the president to be held accountable for his actions. Brave New Films is a progressive video company based in California. They've created a film titled 16 Women and Donald Trump. This briefing is 25 minutes.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming. I'm Robert Greenwald, the president of Brave New Films. The video you just saw, or some of you actually have copies of, is really what helped start why we are here today, why the women are here today. I'm going to talk for a few minutes, then each one of the women will speak, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions. So, Brave New Films, for those of you who aren't aware, is a very small nonprofit based in Los Angeles. And we do media, we do tell stories through short films and full-length documentaries. And we've been following the Me Too movement and its very important contribution and its exposure of pervasive sexual harassment by men in power. And a shout out and expression of the amazing work that wonderful investigative journalists have done that's been so important on this issue and so many issues today. Thank you. We all owe you a deep expression of appreciation and gratitude, not that you're working under the easiest circumstances, but the well-researched, the time, the resources that were put into the investigations here are something that I think we will all look back on with even greater appreciation. As we saw wave after wave of the revelations coming, we started to wonder, although we kind of knew the answer, different men in different businesses. And there was one man who wasn't being held accountable, who wasn't being talked about, who was not being called out, and that was Donald Trump. So on November 6th, we got to work. We researched all of the available past interviews with some of the women here and many other women, all of them talking about Trump's harassment, his assault, and his predatory behavior. 16 women had come forward, and we created a short video, again, that you just saw, that told that story. And as we worked on the video, combining and intercutting the various clips, you know, when you spend several weeks on just this subject and seeing and hearing these people not in person, but through film and video, it really has an impact on your heart, on your soul, on your emotions. These truth tellers had come forward to warn us and to demand our attention. And in that case, in this case, unfortunately, when they originally did, attention was not paid. On November 15th, 9 days after we started, we released the short video, 16 Women and Donald Trump, online. And we did what we've done in the past. We financed it through donations from our thousands of supporters, from $5 to $50. And we used social media as our distribution platform. No ads, no fake news, no clickbait. Just existing documentary footage of 16 women speaking about their experiences being harassed and assaulted by the man who is now America's president. One day after we put it online, almost 400,000 people had seen it. 3 days later, almost 1 million had seen it. And even more importantly, many were sharing it and making comments on it. For those of you who know and study and spend time with social media, you know that's key, right? People are not going to forward something if they don't believe it is honest, if it's truthful, if there's something that they and their friends and relatives are going to learn. And that's the measure we use that's most important. And we saw that happen very, very quickly, again, without any ads or artificial creation. It just, people were taken with it. 3 days later, almost 1 million had seen it, and it grew. To date, we've had, depending on the numbers, who you think is accurate, who nods somewhere between 5 and 7 million posts and cross-posts of the video, and literally hundreds of thousands of shares and comments. It was clear people were concerned, people were angry, and they wanted to either remind themselves and others about the women, or they were hearing and seeing it for the first time. Women who had spoken out and who had basically been ignored, or worse, ignored and attacked. Timing really does matter, and it really made a difference in this case. The fact that people turned a blind eye when these women first spoke out, but now the collective consciousness of our nation has been awakened again, thanks to some really important investigative work of journalists. And we know better. We know a lot better. Predators and harassers must be held accountable. And when the person who's been accused of this is the president, it's really vitally important that we don't look the other way. Trump should be investigated. Our elected officials, no matter what their party affiliation, should act. The women who Trump mistreated, the women who suffered his harassment, assault, sexual misbehavior, some of them have come together to speak out, demand action. Others are joining us and will be joining us in other ways around the country. And in this Me Too moment of reckoning, Trump does not get a pass, and the people who won't let him get a pass are here with us today to tell us what happened and what they want done.
Hello, my name is Samantha Holvey. As a little girl, I would watch the Miss USA pageant every year and dream of being one of those beautiful, successful, incredibly confident women. These dreams never included a man lining us all up to look us over like we were pieces of meat. These dreams never included a man coming into the backstage hair and makeup area while I sat naked under a robe as he walked around looking at us like we were his property before he moved into the dressing room. And these dreams certainly never included this same man becoming president of the United States. I have a new dream now, that this man will be held accountable for his actions and that future generations of women can fulfill their dreams without worry of anyone treating them like they are less than because they're a woman. Thank you.
You want to go next? Sure. Well, good morning. My name is Rachel Crooks, and I think you're all probably familiar with my story. About 12 years ago, as a young receptionist in Trump Tower, I was forcibly kissed by Mr. Trump during our first introduction. Mr. Trump repeatedly kissed my cheeks and ultimately my lips in an encounter that has since impacted my life well beyond the initial occurrence and feelings of self-doubt and insignificance I had. Unfortunately, given Mr. Trump's notoriety and the fact that he was a partner of my employer's, not to mention the owner of the building, I felt there was nothing I could do. Given this hostile work environment, my only solution at the time was to simply avoid additional encounters with him. I do realize that in the grand scheme of things, there are far worse cases of sexual harassment, misconduct, and assault, but make no mistake, there is no acceptable level of such behavior. That some men think they can use their power, position, or notoriety to demean and attack women speaks to their character, not ours, which, believe me, is a tough lesson learned. In my case, I only felt the redemption of knowing it was not my own flaws to blame when I read the account of Temple Taggart, whose story had so mirrored my own that I finally felt absolved of the guilt that I had somehow projected an image that made me an easy target. Instead, this was serial misconduct and perversion on the part of Mr. Trump. Unfortunately, this behavior isn't rare in our society, and people of all backgrounds can be victims. The only reason I'm here today is because this offender is now the president of our country. I can promise you that I would much rather have gained public interest because of something great that I accomplished, rather than something, in this case, quite negative that happened to me. I shared my story last year because it was relevant. Mr. Trump dismissed his words in the Access Hollywood tape as locker room talk, but having been the victim of such actions, I knew better. I decided to let my encounter with him be known along with the various others, yet our stories seem to fall on deaf ears. Recently, the Me Too movement has gained momentum, and women have found strength in one another and the courage to come forward, leading many powerful men to suffer the consequences of their actions. Trump, however, has escaped his path unscathed, but over a dozen women have come forward about his sexual misconduct, and we have video proof of him promoting such behavior. In an objective setting, without question, a person with this record would have entered the graveyard of political aspirations, never to return. Yet here we are with that man as president. I want to believe that as Americans, we can put aside our political inclinations and admit that some things, in fact, do transcend politics, that we will hold Mr. Trump to the same standard as Harvey Weinstein and the other men who were held accountable for their reprehensible behavior. Therefore, I ask that Congress put aside their party affiliations and investigate Mr. Trump's history of sexual misconduct. Thank you.
I'm Jessica Leeds, and I'm the senior member of this group. My story goes way back, and it was an episode on an airplane where I sat next to Trump, and he decided that he was bored and wanted some entertainment. I managed to get away from him and go away, but then 3 years later I ran into him again, and he remembered me. So that really stuck in my memory. Years later, I'm come to realize that he is serious about running for president, and I start telling my story. 30 years had lapsed, at least, but I told everybody. I told my friends, I told my neighbors, I told my book club, I told the ladies at the Y, I told anybody and everybody that I could. You want to know what kind of person Trump is, this man who's running for president? Let me tell you what kind of person this is. So obviously, when the Hollywood tape came out and then the debates happened, I got so angry that I wrote a letter to the editor of the New York Times. They responded, not just with publishing a letter. They did a video and they did a story. Never in a million years did I ever think that one day I would open up my door and pick up my newspaper and find my picture on the front page. The story was as simple as what I just explained. It was an encounter on an airplane and a totally inappropriate behavior on his part. So then there was a kind of a media scrum, as I call it, and then the election came and he won. And I was absolutely destroyed. But I figured the United States is a big, strong country. We can survive this person. But during the course of the year, I kept hearing from people who would come up to me on the street, in the subway, at the library, at the grocery store, at an airport one time, in the swimming pool, all people, and everybody had a story. Everybody had some experience of being vulnerable and being attacked. And I thought things had gotten better for women in business, but apparently I was wrong. Then the anniversary came of his election. There was some renewed interest by the media as to, what I thought and all that. And then the Weinstein story hit, and it was like an explosion in a shingle factory. Things were flying all over the place. And it became apparent that in some areas, the accusations of sexual aggression were being taken seriously, and people were being held accountable, except for our president, and he was not being held accountable. In fact, his staff made a big point of calling us all liars. So we're at the position now where in some areas of our society, people are being held accountable for unwanted behavior. But we are not holding our president accountable for what he is and who he is. So I'd like to see this moment. I think the Me Too movement is quite fascinating, and I'm hoping that it creates more movement and that we get a change. But we shall see, and we all have to hope.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Jessica, Rachel, and Samantha, for sharing your stories. We'll take some questions now from the media. I think our first question is go to Francis. If you'll just say
Thanks, Francis Sellers from
your name,
the
publication.
Post. Francis Sellers from the Washington Post. You talked quite a bit about the Me Too movement, and I'm curious about your next steps and what specifically you hope to achieve in coming weeks or months in addressing the concerns you've raised so bravely. And thank you very much for speaking up about those.
I don't, because I'm too old to have any working knowledge of how the internet works, so I don't know exactly how this Me Too movement is going, but I'm just hoping that it continues forward and it grows. It's like the Women's March in January after the election, which was incredible, and it was worldwide. So I am hoping that this will come forward and produce enough pressure on Congress to address it, more than just for their own members, but to address it in the president.
And will you be going directly to try and push those points forward?
Use the microphone, please, if you could.
I'm sorry. If asked, but it's not like we're running out with banners. I don't think none of us want this attention. None of us are comfortable with it. I mean, if we had been comfortable with being a star, we would have done something else with our lives. But this is important, so when asked, we speak out.
Thank you very much.
Hi there, I'm Renita Young from Reuters. Specifically, are the three of you asking for a congressional investigation, and from what committees? And if not, what specifically do you want to happen?
They've investigated other Congress members, so I think it only stands fair that he be investigated as well. And I think also a nonpartisan investigation is very important, not just for him, but for anybody that has allegations against them. This isn't a partisan issue. This is how women are treated every day. This isn't a partisan issue.
I would just echo what Sam said. I mean, I think if they were willing to investigate Senator Franken, I think it's only fair that they do the same for Trump.
Hi, Tamara with Fox News. Summer Zervos was just in court. She has a defamation suit against the president. Does that give you any hope? What do you hope the outcome of that is? And do you see future similar lawsuits like that? Do you think that that's your path to getting justice?
I was asked that on my interview in CNN last year, and I mean, what am I going to sue him for? Being really creepy? That's not something that would stand up in court, but what I'm more concerned about is, as a culture in our country, what is acceptable behavior, and if the standard that our president is setting, it's not high enough right now.
Right. I mean, the court of public opinion, I think, would be the best place, in my opinion, for this to be judged. Like you said, it's a cultural thing, and we shouldn't let politicians get away with this.
In my situation, it's so old that I don't even think a judge would even enter into any sort of case on it. So I don't have any thoughts of going to the courts for this. This is really a matter of we have to deal with the public, and we have to deal with attitudes and changing a cultural phenomena here. So I don't think the courts are the place to go.
Hi, Allison with CNN. Jessica, this is for a question for you. When you had that episode with Mr. Trump on the airplane, can you give us some details as to what happened and also what happened 3 years later? Just give some details about those encounters.
Well, I was a traveling sales rep for a paper company, and at that time there were very few women traveling business. And I was on this airplane. I cannot remember whether it was Dallas or Atlanta, but coming back to New York. And the stewardess came down the aisle and asked me, would I like to come up to first class? And this had happened before. I'd been invited up to first class several times. I sat next to some really interesting people like George Steinbrenner and Ralph Nader and various CEOs of companies. It was not unusual. So and the food was so much better in first class. So I went up and sat down, and this gentleman was sitting on the window. It was right against the bulkhead, and he introduced himself as Donald Trump. Well, I didn't work out of New York City, so I didn't have any awareness of the Trump name or the Trump business or Donald Trump. So we had dinner. They served the dinner and cleared the dinner, and about that time, he jumped all over me, and he grabbed me, and he was trying to kiss me and everything. And as I recall, he didn't say anything, and I certainly didn't say anything. I didn't yell or ask for help. I remember at one point looking over at the guy sitting across the aisle and thinking, well, why doesn't he come to my aid? I wondered where in hell the stewardess was. But it's when he started to put his hand up my skirt, and that was the last time I wore a skirt traveling. Then I managed, because I'm not a small person, I managed to wrestle myself out of the seat and stood up, grabbed my purse, and went to the back of the airplane and sat back there until the plane landed. Let the plane deplane, all the people get off before I left because I didn't want to run into him again. Fast forward 3 years. I'm now living in New York City, and I go to work for the Humane Society on 59th Street, and they're going to have this big fancy fundraising gala at Saks Fifth Avenue. And they asked me to man the table that distributed the table distributions. So I go, and it's absolutely a New York scene. I got to meet all the designers. I got to meet various and sundry people because the Humane Society as a charity was very interested in inviting all the celebrities in town. And that's when I became aware that Donald Trump was the Donald Trump of the Trump family of New York City. And I recognized his picture. I remembered him. People remember when they're assaulted. They remember when, where, why, and what they had on, and they remember how they got out of it. They remember everything, even if it happened when they were 8 years old. So I'm handing out the chits for the table, and up comes Donald Trump, and at that time his wife, Ivana, right? And Ivana was very pregnant, and I hand him the ticket, and I'm thinking in the back of my mind, yeah, that's the guy. And he looks at me, and he says, I remember you. You're the woman from the airplane. Only he used another term before woman. And it cleared the room. It absolutely cleared the room. And I thought, oh boy. But he went on, and I went home, and that was the end of the story. Well, that was 1983. When in 2016, when I realized that he was really serious about running for president, I started telling my story to everybody. I said, let me tell you what kind of a person this Donald Trump is. I told everybody that I could get to sit down, and I told my family, and I told my friends, I told my neighbors, I told everybody that some people didn't believe me. which I understand completely because it was so long ago. But I wanted to get it out. And then the debates happened, and he lied about, and also the Hollywood bus tapes came out, and I just was so infuriated that I wrote a letter to the editor, and they called me, and I thought, I'm going to get my letter published. This is really super. But no, they sent over a reporter. They asked for the people that I had told over the year. They called them. They confirmed the story. And then they wrote it up. And that's really what happened.
Thank you.
Amy Goodman from Democracy Now! I was wondering if each of you could respond to President Trump endorsing the accused pedophile Roy Moore for the U.S. Senate, and if you feel that President Trump should resign.
One, I think the endorsement is disgusting, absolutely disgusting. And two, I don't think he should have been elected to begin with. I think with all of the women coming forward, and so many of the women that this is the first time we've ever met, and so many of the women having the same stories, and him just being so braggadocious about this throughout the years, and for there to be audio and video of him saying these things, it's just, yes, I believe other folks have resigned. I think he should. I don't think he ever will. But I think he should. But I think it's, the public needs to be aware. They need to know this is the type of person he is.
I think he is trying to back for political expediency somebody who's going to win. He doesn't have any moral compass. So the accusations against Roy Moore, puts him in the same category of, well, I didn't do that to those women, so why should I believe those women down in Alabama? It's really horrifying, and it's confusing because you would think that the good people of Alabama could see through this, but we've gotten so polarized with the politics that they want to keep a Republican seat, even though it's a pedophile. If I had I think Trump will eventually be forced to resign. Probably most likely because of financial matters in the Mueller investigation. I unfortunately feel that the sexual aggression issue is kind of low on the list of things wrong with Trump. But it's important enough to me to bring this up and hope that we can get some sort of change in our culture that will improve the situation going forward.
Well, nothing shocks me or surprises me about Trump anymore. In fact, I think his endorsement of Roy Moore makes perfect sense for him because he was able to just deny, what we said, and that got him elected just fine. So, it's like it's passing the torch for Roy to do the same. In terms of resigning, I think it's probably the right thing to do, but I would never imagine he's going to do that. So I think the investigation by Congress is probably the only thing we can ask for.
Thank you very much.